Hey, it's Andrew Grove for Cunners.com, and today is my first of, I think, about 6 videos I'm going to make. A bunch of replayer hands. Today's theme is going to be, I think all these hands, I have about 4 hands marked. Should be able to get through all of them though, and they're all hands that I've defended in the big blind but did not 3-bet, so I just called pre-flop. And yeah, since I've been doing a lot of live session videos, not that those aren't fun to look at and stuff, but I'm trying to balance my video making. So I'm including some hand histories this time, and I will be going back and forth between the replayer and Evernote, where I have some Omaha Ranger stuff we can look at about the hands. So yeah, that's about it for my intro. Let's get into it. And also for these hands I'll be doing, I think in most of the videos, at least in today's video, I think I'll try to do it in most of the hands. I will have my whole cards hidden until I think it's an appropriate time to look at them, so we can think about our whole range that gets to the flop and maybe to the turn river without looking at our whole cards, to see, just to think more clearly and not have as many biases about the hand. So without further ado, let's get into it. So in this first hand, Villain's going to raise. Villain's a regular. He's going to raise from cutoff to 3x, and I call. Pretty standard so far. He opens 42% from the cutoff. I check to him. As far as the leading range on this board, I usually don't lead too much heads up. Especially on a board like this, as you'll see in a second, it kind of hits both of our ranges. So he c-bets, I guess it's 3/4 pot or so. So let's take a look at our ranges before we see what we should do with what, or we can help us figure it out. So hopefully we see this clearly. This is an Omaha Ranger. So I have the board texture at the top, and Villain's frequencies are on the left here, and Hero's frequencies on the right. I didn't go into like absolutely everything you could with Omaha Ranger for this hand, just for some basic flop frequencies so we get an idea. So Villain's mid range is 40% his opening range, and for Hero's range, I'm calling, I guess, about 60. I'm calling about 60%. I guess I could have made this because I'm actually calling about 60% and 3-betting 10%. So this probably should be 70% minus 10% instead of 60% minus 10%. But you know, it's close enough, I think. So yeah, subrange 1, this row here, I looked at I was looking at value hands. Actually, subrange 1 and subrange 2. So value hands, if you don't know the syntax for Omaha Ranger, I'll be explaining all these to you. So this means 2 pair or better, minus bottom 2 pair. And so that includes all the sets, and you know, queen 6, basically queen 6 or better. And it's both about 12% for us. So when I was mentioning about leading, when I was going through the hand history, I don't think, it's not like we have a range advantage or anything, and if we lead, you know, the Villain can call and turns become kind of tough. So unless you really want to develop a leading range here, you have to really think about it, I think, if you wanted to do it. So I don't think, I think it'd be fine either way, but I haven't given much thought to a leading range, and we don't really have a range advantage either way. So when the board's somewhat dynamic, even though there's no flush draw. So yeah, I think checking standard on this board. And also if you look at WR, which means wrap, we both have about exactly the same amount of wraps. Not hard combo count, I actually have more of both of these in my range, but because my range is wider overall, percentage wise of our range, it's about the same. So in subranges, subrange 3 is, I just looked at top pair plus open ender, because that's kind of the hand you can either check call if you want, or check raise depending on how Villain's playing. I think you could kind of go either way with this hand, but I was just kind of, when I was looking through things about this hand, I kind of noticed that it's only 2% over frequency, so it's not a huge part of our range. So I guess you could kind of put that either a check raise or check call range. Sub range is 4 and 5. I looked at hands that I think would be good as a check raise kind of bluff. So that includes just naked top pair hands. That's top pair that doesn't have two pair, no wrap, no open ender, no nut gutter. Those are hands that I like to check call. Like if it had top pair and wrap, maybe I would check raise. Top pair and open ender, probably just check call. Top pair plus nut gutter, probably just check call. And in sub range 5 line, it's a pair plus a gutter, minus two pair, minus a wrap, minus top pair, no open ender. So it would be a hand like 9 jack 8 will make sense. And the reason you want to check raise hands like this is they're kind of maybe too weak to check call, and additionally they block hands that villain would check call with. I mean would call your raise with. So when you check raise, you want them to be folding. When you check raise bluff, you want to be folding. So those are good hands to be thinking about check raising with as a bluff. And it's about 20% of those hands total. And maybe some other hands you could check raise as a bluff, but that's about what I came up with. And then sub range 6, so we're not thinking about just check calling. I thought about hands that will be, so that we're not just check raising. There's some hands we should be check calling too. Those are like naked overpairs, because a lot of overpairs I think would have some gutters and stuff on this board, but maybe you can just put like overpair plus gutter, so you just include those hands. Top pair plus a gutter. You can maybe include like, I didn't make this super complete, but just getting ideas. So I think middle pair plus like a nut gutter would be okay to check call, and just bare open enders like bare 7-8 or bare jack 10 we would be calling, and make sure that this is because I think like a hand like an open ender is kind of too weak to. It's kind of too strong to check raise because you want to get 3-bet, and at the same time it just kind of plays really good to check call. You have 8 clean outs and probably a backdoor flush draw to go with it a lot of times. So, and make sure when you're doing the syntax you exclude two pair of blutter and wraps, because otherwise they would be better candidates for a check raise for value. And we're just looking at this particular class of hands. So I did decide to check raise, and I guess now is an appropriate time to show what my hand was. It was jack 7 5. So where does that fall in with what we're looking at? It is a pair plus a gutter, and doesn't have two pair, wrap, top pair, or open ender. So I actually think it's a really good hand to check raise with, additionally into having just like a pair and a gutter, because we block jack 10, which is going to call us a lot, and we have the backdoor flush draw, which helps sometimes. So as far as hands we would want to barrel, as cards we want to barrel, I think king's a good one, 10's a good one, 8's a good one, 7 might be okay because we block the straight cards for those. Actually 8's kind of tricky because we make a non-nut straight. I guess that's the third nut straight, and but we block jack 10, so it's kind of weird on that board. Clubs are good to barrel on, and I suppose queen 9s and 6s are okay to barrel on too, although you want to be careful sometimes because not all villains are going to 3-bet the flop with top 2, and correctly so. So you want to slow down a little bit when you get to turn cards like that. So, and by the way, check raise was a really good option for me, I thought at the time, because villain is c-betting 82%, so he's likely over c-betting this board a lot, and just blocking anything really helps us here. And let me see his raise, his fold to raise c-bet, where is it? Fold c-bet to raise is 50% over 10 times, so I guess that's kind of high. Villain calls. So what is his hand range here? Probably, I'd say he doesn't have pocket queens, probably not pocket 9s, but I think any other value hand he could have. And then also we could have like top pair and a open ender, maybe like ace king queen 10, so like top pair and a nut gutter with some overcard, something like that. He could easily have wraps king jack 10, but again that's not as likely because we block those hands with our jacks. So turn is beautiful for us. I mean, we really can't ask for a much better turn card that we. Well, the best thing that could happen for us is villain folds the flop, but if he doesn't fold the flop, then a turn like this is really good because we pick up the flush draw, obviously. But this is the kind of board we want to barrel now with our exact hand type. Like we don't really want to barrel. We don't really don't want to see a queen 9 or 6 because I think he would more likely have hands like that since we don't block hands like that. So if we had, for example, like if we were check raise bluffing with like queen 7-7-5, something like that, or like queen 10 5-4 with the backdoor flush draw, then I think a king's not as good of a card because he's gonna have more wraps and stuff. But since we block some of the made hands on the flop, I think those are the kind of turn cards we're looking for. Hopefully that makes sense. So we block Jack 10 here, so we should get a lot of folds with the barrel here. And I think as far as sizing goes, I think you just want to make sure you're able to set up a good sizing for the river to shove. So it's not too hard to do that. And I think, yeah, bet around 52. I think that's fine. Could even go a little less, a little bit more, but that seems fine to me. I don't really have a strong opinion about that as long as it sets up a good river sizing. Villain calls. And river's pretty perfect for us, I think. It's hard to think of too many ways he would have enough flush draw here. I think that's just a kind of a cooler. It will be interesting to look in Omaha Ranger to kind of define a hand range that gets the river here. I think a lot of hands are going to be like king queen for him on the turn, king 9, maybe queen 9 calls still. Maybe he had a queen 9 and a flush draw somehow, as well as his maybe pocket 9s or pocket 6s if he still had that, picked up a flush draw or something like that. So when we're thinking about that kind of hand range on the river, he doesn't have too many bluffs. Like he almost always has a made hand here. He even has some flushes. You know, he can have a lot of straights here. It's pretty easy for him to have a straight, even though we block a lot of them. So he's just not going to turn any hand into a bluff. And he's not going to value bet those hands either because the board changed a lot. His absolute hand strength has gone down on the river. So I think the best thing to do here is just shove ourselves. This is what I did. Just a little over half pot. And to give full disclosure about the hand, villain ended up calling, and his hand I think makes a lot of sense. Didn't want to lose the maximum versus top set on the flop. I think he or middle set on the flop, and I think he was perhaps looking for a safe turn to get it in, maybe like a 4 or 3 or a deuce, something like that. Maybe an ace. I could go brick with ace queen possibly, and on a card that completes the wraps on the turn, he was probably deciding to fold or see if I would check it to him on the turn, like slowing down with my made hand or whatever. But since he picked up a flush draw, I think it's a pretty standard call by him on the turn, and I think he played the hand perfectly. So let's move on to the next hand. We are going to face a mid raise this time from the cutoff again. And we're going to call, and I think I'm calling at least 90% here, I think. So maybe I should adjust my Omaha Ranger pre-flop range again for this hand, but I think it's going to be close again either way. So the board is 4-3 deuce with the flush draw. We check to our opponent, who's opening about 40%, so about the same as the villain in the previous hand. This villain's c-betting only about 55%. And I think it would be cool to look at again for this hand. Maybe you can do it yourself in your own time, but whose range hits this board harder? And it might be us, because if we're defending really wide and he's only opening 40%, then I think there's a good might be a good candidate. This board might be a good candidate to have a leading range on most of the time. But as it stands, I checked because I really haven't developed leading ranges in this board yet, or in general in the kind of secret raise pots yet. And villain c-bet Steelers pot, and I think on this board we're usually going to be check calling, but we check raise, so let's kind of look at um, our range here. Actually, I think, yeah, we're gonna look at that on the turn. So villain calls, and the turn is the ace of hearts. So thinking about our range from the flop to the turn, let's look at Omaha Ranger in Evernote here. So I put in the board texture at the top, and this is the post flop part of Omaha Ranger. So we could look at how our turn range is developed. But first, let's look at pre-flop. Pre-flop, I put 70% minus 10%, and again, I guess you could put about 90% minus 10% would be okay. So on the flop, on a 4-3 deuce two-tone, I put in a set plus gutter, as this would be our check raise range. So I put a set plus gutter because I think we get peeled a lot when we check raise this board because we're repping kind of narrow, and there's a lot of hands that villain can just easily kind of just call, like any kind of like pair plus gutter. It'd be like 4-5 with the backdoor flush draw. You can call a lot of flush draws. You can call, there's lots of two pair combos. You can easily have something else that we'll feel comfortable with, or just even kind of one pair hands, maybe just higher flush draws and stuff like that. So I like to check raise a hand like that, even though we kind of want protection for our check call range as well. I check raise all the nut straights for value. I check raise the second nut straight plus a flush draw for value. And as far as my bluffs, I like to check raise, again, hands that people would not, they're kind of black hands that they will call. So maybe like the ace of hearts blocker and plus a nut gutter. So we actually have some equity with the hand. And then also like 5-5 and 6-6. And I put like, minus 2 pair or better. So it doesn't include like straights and sets and stuff like that. And I guess 6-6 with a flush draw would be cool too. So I guess that includes that as well. So when we get to the turn, we need a plan for what we want to do on these flushing turns. So I wanted to look at what our range consists of. And as you can see, it consists of, in sub-range turn 1, flush is the core of the time. We have a set very not so often here, because I guess just because we don't have a lot of like pocket 2s, pocket 3s, and pocket 4s in our range pre-flop. And also the nut straight that does not have a flush or a set, so the bare nut straight is a decent portion of our range. So yeah, with that in mind, let's look at what our actual hand is. Bam. So I had on the flop the nut straight plus a flush draw. So as you can recall, yeah, I check raise all the nut straights, on the flop. So that hand definitely fits into my flop raising range that I created. And it's important to make sure that the hands, your actual hand of these analyses that you make for yourself in Omaha Ranger or Poker Juice or for Poker Tools or whatever other program you might be using, maybe like Hard Owner TV if you play more No Limit Hold'em, that your actual hand fits into the ranges you created. So always double check your work. So here we have a small flush on the turn, and as you can see, we do have a decent amount of flushes, but we need to make some kind of plan for when we have sets and nut straights. So I think the plan that I had here was to use some of my lower flushes, since I can't like bet for value as much here, because I suppose you could call with a straight, but I kind of be value cutting myself a lot if I'm going to start betting here for value. So I think a good plan would be saving some lower flushes if you have them on the turn here as bluff catchers. So you can check here with like your lower flushes and as well as your sets and your straights to be completely balanced. And you can be betting your higher flushes for value, and somehow maybe if you had like the king of hearts with 5-7, you could be betting that as a bluff to balance that out. So you could add maybe some more checkers bluffs to your flop range, because I think we have quite a lot of in the flop here. This isn't, I wouldn't set this as a perfect check raise range, but just to get an idea, I think you can add some more bluffs to that as well. Maybe like not only ace of hearts minus flush draw plus nut gutter, but also like king of hearts minus flush draw plus nut gutter. And on this ace of hearts turn, you would have some good bluffs to balance out your bluffing range, to balance out your betting range. Or you could maybe just check your entire range here, since you don't have a ton of flushes compared to your straights and your sets combined together. So I did in this hand end up checking. I agree with my actual play, since I just explained why I would be checking a small flush here. Villain bets somewhat larger. So as far as the range that he would get to the turn with, I would think it would include, I guess he could have some straights on the flop. He doesn't have to raise all his straights on the flop. But I don't think he'd be betting that here. He could have 2 pair on the flop that he call with, maybe like 7, 6, 4, 3, and that could seem like a good hand to be betting here to kind of turn into a bluff if I have a straight, especially like a heart blocker. He could have a naked flush draw like I got here, and now he's betting for value. It makes a lot of sense. So I think he has hands he's turning into a bluff, maybe like 6, 4, 3 like I said, or like 7, 6, 4, stuff like that, and also too his higher flush draws that got there on the turn that he can start betting for value here. But since we are in bluff catcher mode, I am going to try to catch a bluff if I can. So I call on the turn, and the river bricks out. I check to villain, and he checks back. And looks like he went for a thin value on the turn. I can see where this would be okay. I'm not exactly sure what his thought process was. There's a lot of like reasons he could be betting there for value. Obviously, it's not a bluff. And I'm not exactly sure how he's constructing his ranges on the turn there. But yeah, I think on the turn, I think it was wise to balance his. It's good to be able to see an Omaha Ranger and whatever program you're using to see how your range is constructed. And since I am going to be checking a lot of very vulnerable hands, not nutty hands on the turn, I need to balance them with some flushes. So I think this is the perfect hand to do it with, and that's another example of how you can construct your flop range to check raise on boards like this. So moving on to the next hand. So I'm going to skip to the 4th hand history here, since kind of running out of time. This first 2 hands took a little bit longer than I thought, but it's okay. And I'm skipping the 3rd hand because I thought this hand was a lot cooler than the 3rd hand, so we'll do this one. And I'm purposely showing my cards since this hand's be more about what villain's range is than it is our range. So we face a 3x from the cutoff, and just call him with this hand. And again, I think it's a board that kind of hits, both our ranges kind of equally. So you can lead if you want. I don't think it really matters. I think maybe checking is better because this board's kind of dynamic, and again, it's kind of difficult to play on turns if we lead and don't really have a solid game plan for what we're doing. So, and I think our hand when we're facing this bet here is a little too strong to check raise, meaning that we can actually call and play kind of comfortably on turns. So let's think about what villain would have on the turn here. On the flop here. So I put in the whole board texture as it's going to run out, and pre-flop I gave him 26%. Yeah, that's his steal from the cutoff. So a little bit tighter than the previous 2 hands. They're the previous villains. They're the villains of the previous 2 hands when they're stealing from the cutoff. And on the flop, I gave him almost 54% c-betting frequency. I think it could be a little less. I think you can take some of these hands out of here. I'll go through what I put in his range, and then I'll say what we could kind of take out. 2 pair better. I think maybe some players are checking back like 8-3 and even 10-3 here, because it really sucks to get check raise on this board. Those hands are not doing very well versus check raise range for value. I have top pair plus the 5th nut flush draw or better, and a gutter or better, because I think a lot of like ace-10 of diamonds will see bet here. Although you could narrow this range even more, because for instance, say if villain had like 10, 5, 5, 4 double suited with diamonds, I don't think that's an automatic c bet. I think that's a hand you can probably check back and call a fair amount of turns. I also have a pair plus an open ender are better, and the fifth and a flush draw are better. And again, my hands like maybe Jack 8, 7, 5 double suited with Jack 7 diamonds could be a check back. Since again, you don't want to get check raised with a hand like that. Enough flush draw, second enough flush draw, wrap, gutter, or better without a flush draw. So like the gutter here would be the sort of bluffing hands, minimal equity. You don't really care if you get check raised or not. Maybe like Queen 9 with nothing else. Maybe just Queen 9 with backdoor spade or something like that. And also to the nut flush draw and second nut flush draw, they're kind of like if you just had a bare nut flush draw, you might check back here. So you could probably take some of those hands out as well. So I think the frequency could be a lot lower here, but I think this villain would probably see a better range, something like this. That could be wrong. And just looking through some of the sub ranges of the flop here, he has 2 pair or better. 17% of his betting range, not his overall flop frequency, but his betting range in the flop. And as some of these other hands here, you see, only has a wrap about 6%. So moving along to the turn here. So I did call, did not check raise. Turn, so we have like middle 2 now, and so a flush draw, no gutter. We check and face another bet. And looking how we're doing his overall range here. Oh, I wanted to mention his flop betting range has about 60% equity versus us, even though that includes a lot of like flush draws and stuff like that and gutters. But we do, on the other hand, do have 40%, so we can easily call. And on the turn here, I said he's going to continue with about half his range here, honestly betting. So he'll be betting straights, obviously a set and a gutter, flush draw and a gutter. So this is his kind of like his bluffing hands here. Nut straight blockers, so 9, 9, and 7, 7. The primary flush draw and the turn flush draw, so double flush draw hands could be betting here a lot, and the bare open ender without the straight, so like Jack 9 and I guess 7, 5 would be like that too. So as we see, he only has a straight about 12% of the time, and straights are doing very well versus us, obviously. He only has a set and a gutter about 4% of the time, but likewise he has a flush draw plus a gutter or an open ender a large amount of the time. But even still, those hands have 45% equity versus us, so those are really good bluffing hands. Those are very good semi-bluffing hands versus us. So if you're thinking about hands that you can be double barreling with, try to include hands like that on the flop too. Those are very good to balance in with your solid made hands here. But notice how the 6 didn't really connect with his value hands that are or is like his draw hands from the flop, as well as maybe like a queen would. That'd be a cool exercise to look at to see how the queen would help his range versus the 6. I think it would help it a lot more, since he's betting a lot more Jack 9 than he would be 9, 7, I think. So we do call, as our equity versus betting range was about 49% versus his range. And yeah, I didn't put my range here at the bottom here. It's like the versus range you put at the bottom here for all of his his betting ranges on various streets. I just put my actual hands, so I could see how my actual hand was doing versus ranges. Then I guess you've already seen the river. The river's an 8, and we check and face a bet, and we're probably at like the very top of our range here. I imagine we have some 10-8s since we're not check raising all of our 10-8s on the flop, but yeah, I think if we can't have pocket 8s because we don't have it in our hand, I think 8-6 is probably the best hand we have most of the time. So for that reason, we probably want to call. But actually looking at his range here, he only has, given his flop and turn betting frequency, he only has a full house 8% of the time that he gets the river with. And this is like, I'm not saying he bets everything on the river here, but just looking at his overall range he could bet on the river. Only 8% of his range that got to the river is a full house. He also has about 11.5% of his range as straights, which is interesting, and he has top pair or worse 50% of the time, and then the rest of his range is air. or trips. Could be trips. I didn't really think about that. Like you could be value betting trips here. But if he has a full house 8% of the time and a straight 11.5% of the time, and we beat the full house, I mean, we beat the straight, obviously. If you look at this board texture, he could easily be saying, okay, the draw's missed. He could put me on a missed draw and here down with, top pair, maybe like queen, queen, jack, nine, something like that. Or I could have like queens in a flush draw or something like that I could call with. So he could be value betting his straights here. So even if he's like not value betting, or if he's not bluffing air on the river, we still beat like half his range at least if he is value betting like most of his straights. So for that reason alone, it's a call. And if he's bluffing at all, besides because the straight's a value bet, obviously, if he's not bluffing at all, then we would be profitable. But yeah, if he is bluffing, then it's an even more of a slam dunk call. Not to mention, like before, we are at the top of our range, so we do call. And he had a very standard hands, wrap on the flop with backdoor flush draw, turn a flush draw on a straight, and on the river he decided that he has a value bet, and I think I agree with his whole line. And yeah, just to make sure that his hand actually fits in with the ranges we assigned to him, go back to the flop, and sure enough, he had a wrap on the flop, so that fits into his the ranges we assigned to him. Okay, I think that's going to be it for this video. I only got through 3 hands, but I think I went through the hands in depth as I wanted to. So yeah, there's going to be more of this for the next video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and if you have any comments or suggestions of how I can do this better, or what kind of replayer videos you would like to see, about what kind of spots you would like to see, definitely let me know in the comments. Until then, this has been Andrew Grove for CoverNotes.com. Thank you.
Hey yo, it's Andrew Grove, aka This Passing for CoverNotes.com, and I'm going to continue with my theme of odds oracle assisted analysis style. I hope you guys are finding these types of videos very beneficial. Yeah, it's almost 2014 and the state of the game is definitely switching more to the mathematical / GTO approach. Even in PLO, where it's harder to visualize hard counts of different ranges and all kinds of different spots. I read and hear a lot of people say that at small stakes, they don't care about balancing at all, and that you can just exploit your villains' weaknesses to make money. And being able to exploit villains is great, but if you're not putting in the work in odds oracle now, then I think the game is going to start passing you by, and or you'll find it tough when you move up through mid stakes, where a lot of grinders are putting in the work away from the tables right now. And some people might see these videos and think, well, how often are these specific situations going to happen? But anyone who's spent a fair amount of time with odds oracle would probably agree with me when I say that the studying you do helps you understand the game a lot better and sort of seeps through your brain like subconsciously when you play, like as opposed to knowing the exact count of your opponent's ranges in all spots or what have you. That'd be pretty sick, but probably not going to be able to happen. Ran aside, let's go into the hand. This was at PLO 100 on Stars about 2 weeks ago. Shoot air, tight reg, open from middle position, and I 3-bet. This hand plays fine as a call, but I like having this kind of hand in my 3-bet range because, well, it's a good hand, and also I want to be 3-betting this kind of player a lot in position, and the ace and king kind of blocks the hands that he would 4-bet me with. Not that he's 4-betting very wide overall anyway, only about 2.1% of his opening range. Also note that I made it 3x instead of full pot. I've been doing that more lately as my 3-bet range in position is very ISO heavy and benefits from having a higher stack to pot ratio post flop, where I can use my position more effectively. Folds to him, he calls and checks to us on a board in which it seems that we hit quite strongly. Before we figure out how both of our ranges interact with this board and what our plan is with our actual hand and our range, we need to make our macro for hero here. This is a fairly balanced 11% 3-bet range, and I chose to put hands in it that not only play well post-flop in position, but are also more likely to have fold equity at certain stages of the hand. with the ace blockers. So I included the normal aces, good kings, good queens, rundowns and broadways, lots of decent ace-high double-suited hands, which is where Hero's actual hand falls, and some good paired and like double-paired hands, and also some kind of weak ace-high double-suited hands in the last couple rows, which would include like ace-jack 9-4 double-suited, ace-7-5 deuce double-suited, etc. Hands that we like to 3-bet instead of calling sometimes. And feel free to pause the video and copy this macro and any other macro that I use in my videos. It's very useful to have a good template to start with, and you can chop it up however you want, obviously. I then put in my range versus Villain's range in Odds Oracle, and I gave Villain the top 13% without aces. I think it's pretty close to his actual range, I would say. And as you can see, we both hit this board kind of equally. I find it cool to look at it in this sense before breaking down ranges, because there are some situations where someone's range like completely dominates another player's range with certain flops. Like an extreme example would be a tight 3-better versus a 70% button opener who called a 3-bet on the flops like ace king 7 rainbow. I then created Villain's shipping range, which consists of all made hands, then top or middle pair plus a flush draw, and kings with the king-eye flush draw. I excluded his nut flush draw combos because we have that in our hand, obviously. His calling range I put as weaker queen XXX and some weaker pair plus flush draw combos. This particular player is sort of a caller instead of a shover. So I do think these hands are in his calling range, despite some of them possibly being okay to ship equity-wise, and maybe that benefit from not having to play turns and rivers out of position as well. And the last important part of this slide is that Villain has effective air about 47% of the time, which is our fold equity for our EV calculation. So I wanted to figure out if we could shove any nut flush draw within our range here that didn't have a pair, hence the macro. And doing so shows us a loss of about 2 big blinds over 100, which is effectively break even in my eyes. Villain could be shoving slightly wider or folding slightly more to our c-bet to change our EV from negative to positive. Also, our actual hand is probably doing a little bit better than minus 2 big blinds over 100 because of the backdoor flush draw and backdoor straight draws. And also note that we were 130 big blinds deep to start the hand. It would most likely be at least neutral EV to bet call this flop with a bare nut flush draw if we were 100 big blinds deep to start the hand. And our plan would change considerably for the whole hand if we were much deeper than this. Then I wanted to start creating the macros for Hero's bet calling, bet folding, and check back ranges. And I just started trying out different types of hands versus Villain shoving ranges, and I noticed that naked kings are doing kind of poor, as well as bottom 2, and as well as a 7 plus a naked flush draw. Ace-ace and ace-queen are on the fringe, kind of like the naked nut flush draw, and I'll be including those in Hero's bet calling range as well. So I then created the macro for Hero's bet call and check back ranges. I tested all these parts of the bet call range individually, which is obviously very important to do, just to make sure. And despite Hero 3-betting a little wide pre-flop, Hero can bet call 56% of his range profitably on this board, which is pretty cool. And for the check back range, I included hands that have some equity, that don't want to bet fold, and also which has some showdown value as well, like naked queens, naked sevens, naked kings, and the non-nut flush draws. Note that although I don't have it highlighted, these check back combos are excluding the bet call combos because of the exclamation mark before the bet call range at the end of the macro. This leaves us with 19% air, and I think the best idea for our air is to bet fold hands that have little room to improve. And this can't really be exploited by Villain too easily because we're bet calling so much of our betting range, and because Villain is folding a lot of his range to our c-bet, so we want to take advantage of that as much as we can. And then we can throw hands that have significant room to improve on future streets, like ace king jack 10, which can call like non-flush 9, 10, jack, king, and ace turns, and maybe like 6, 8, 9 with the backdoor flush draw, stuff like that, into our check back range. And this will give us a lot of board coverage on turns, in addition to our already create a check back range that includes a lot of showdown value, like pocket kings or whatever, so that villain can't just auto stab turns and river because hero will have plenty of turns to either call or raise on. And back to the actual hand, I see bet my standard is sizing on Dryas boards in position, villain flats, and checks to us on a 7 turn. And when I was playing this hand in real time, I had a little bit of trouble figuring out what the best play was for hero, but after doing some further range analysis, it became quite clear. Since villain shoves anything that would now be a boat on the turn, his range is capped to a bare 7, which even then he only has a mere 4% of the time. Compared to hero, who is uncapped and has chips or better 22% of the time, not to mention several combos of overpairs as well. Our plan here is definitely to bet with our monsters, along with our ace-queen plus, I would say. Villain does have a lot of bluff catchers on the turn, but we could punish his range really hard simply because our range has such a higher percentage of hands stronger than his. So the main idea, I guess, to sum it up, is to really think about what happens when someone caps their range in certain spots and how you can exploit it, simply by being able to visualize how much stronger your range is than theirs, even if you 3-bet a wider range on the button or whatever. This hand kind of took it to the extreme, just because of how this particular villain was always going to be shoving his strong hands out of position on the flop. But there definitely are other types of hands where most villains can and will have balanced check call ranges, and you'll just have to weight their flop and or turn ranges differently. Thanks for watching.